So we've recently reviewed the new M17 R5, and obviously we've reviewed the X17 R2. And one of the biggest comments I've received in the messages for both these laptops is, can we compare both these devices? So tonight, that's exactly what we're going to do. Now, in order to make this fair, I've tried to get the specs as even as possible between the two, but obviously the X17 R2 is an Intel machine and the M17 R5 is a Ryzen machine, so this is the best that we can do. So specs wise, I've got the Ryzen 9 6900HX on the M17 R5, and I've got the Intel i7 12700H on the X17 R2. Now yes, this is the upgraded processor on the M17 R5, but bear in mind the Intel processors are better this generation, so hopefully we'll see how they do against each other. We've also got the same graphics card in both of these, the RTX 3070 Ti. I've got 16GB of DDR5 RAM in each, and they've both got a Gen 4 SSD in here. So realistically, other than the processor, these are pretty much the same. Okay, so to start off then, we're going to look at the physical aspects of the machines before we start looking at the performance. But just want to mention that the X17 R2 is their absolute top tier premium range on the Alienware laptops, whereas the M17 R5 is more of the sort of the entry range now on the Alienware machines. So build quality wise, before we even start talking about anything else, is an easy win to the X17 R5. They've just used slightly better materials. It feels a lot more solid than the M17 R5 does. Now that's not to say that the M17 R5 feels cheap. It really doesn't. It's just this is a really premium laptop, and normally you pay an awful lot more for the X17 over the M17. But unusually at the moment, price is a bit weird. This has just been released, and at least in the UK, the pricing is absolutely crazy on the Ryzen version. Now I believe in America it's a little bit cheaper, but in the UK, there's about £100 difference between the M17 R5 and the X17 R2, which is a bit crazy, and I'm sure Dell will drop that once it's been out for a little while. Now, before we actually look at the laptops themselves, the packaging, the X17 R2 comes in much more premium packaging than the M17 R5. You get a much nicer unboxing experience. You get a nice box within a box, and it's a box you'd probably want to keep as well, whereas the M17 R5 is pretty much no frills. And that also then carries over to the PSU you get with each of these machines. The M17 R5 gets the old-fashioned style power brick. It's a 240 watt for this laptop. Now, because the X17 R2 is a 3070 Ti, we get the 240 watt new slim GAN power charger. And it's an awful lot slimmer and lighter than the big brick that we used to get. So considering the pricing of both of these laptops, I do feel that they should both get this new power adapter. So straight away, looking at the two side by side, you can see there's a fair amount of difference. You only get one color option with each of these machines. With the Alienware M17 R5, you've got the dark side of the moon. And on the X17 R2, we've got the lunar light outer, but with the dark side of the moon, palm rest, and inner. You can also see straight away that despite both of these being 17-inch gaming laptops, the X17 has a newer chassis, which is quite a lot slimmer than this M17 R5. But despite being thinner, the other dimensions, I believe, are pretty similar. So all in all, if you just pick one up over the other one, you wouldn't really know which is which. It's only when you've got them side by side you can see that the X17 R2 is thinner. Now you see we've both got the same 17s embossed on the lid to show that it's a 17-inch Alienware range. Now ports are very different between these two. The M17 R5 has ports on both sides and the rear of the laptop, whereas the X17 R2 has all of the ports on the rear, but with just a power jack and a headphone jack on either side of this machine. Now personally, I do prefer the layout on the M17 R5 because I like the fact I've got some USBs on the sides. I hate the fact on the X17 you're always going to be leaning over or spinning your laptop round to find your actual ports that you want to plug into on the laptop. But other than that, everything else is better with this X17 R2. We obviously get Thunderbolt, being that it's an Intel over a Ryzen. The Thunderbolt is wired directly to the RTX card, unlike the USB-C on the M17 R5. We also get a micro SD card slot and a mini display port on the X17 R2, which we don't get on the M17 R5, making the actual X17 a slightly better all-round package. Now then, looking at the actual laptops themselves, we've got the same sort of design on both of these, with the rear grille piece that sticks out the back, with the same honeycomb grills pumping all the hot air out the back of the machine, and a little bit of venting on either side. Then we've got a lot of intakes in the bottom and the top with both of these laptops. So if I open up this laptop, or both of these laptops here, you can see that we've actually got a lot of venting at the top above the keyboard as well. Now with regards to the RGB, they are very similar between the two models. Now they've both got the same style RGB backlit per key keyboard. They've both got the same Alienware power button that lights up, and the rear alien head on the top of the lid. But with regards to the Tron bars on both these machines, the new X17 R2 gets a much more vibrant mini LED Tron bar that has a lot more lighting zones and just looks an awful lot more vibrant. But in all honesty, this is a light that's at the back of your laptop that you're never really going to look at yourself anyway. But if you put them side by side, the X17 does look a lot nicer. Okay, so with both of the screens open, you can see straight away, because that X17 R2 is slimmer, it just sits a little bit lower than the M17 R5. But otherwise, if you're looking at the decks between the two, they do look very similar. They've both got the dark side of the moon on the palm rest. They've both got exactly the same RGB per key Alienware keyboard. And that's one nice thing in a way, that basically every Alienware gets exactly the same keyboard. And these keyboards feel amazing to type on. So, if you buy the, say, lower spec M17 R5 over the X17, you're not getting a worse keyboard. So that's one nice feature. Now, a lot of people are still moaning because there is no number pad on any of the range. And I think that is a shame, because there was an opportunity here where they could have provided one with a number pad and one without a number pad, like they used to do with the old M17 R4. But Dell have decided to standardize it, and they all have exactly the same keyboard. And when we look at the actual touchpads, you'll notice the M17 R5 has a bigger touchpad than the X17 R2. But despite it being bigger, it's a worse touchpad, unfortunately. It's more of a plasticky feeling touchpad. There's a little bit, it's only tiny, a little bit of play in that one in comparison to the X17 R2, which has got a glass trackpad, and it feels absolutely amazing. So even though it's smaller, I do prefer the trackpad on the X17 R2. And as they're side by side, we're going to do a quick speaker test and compare both the speakers. Okay, speaker test. Now we're at 80% volume, and we're going to start with the X17 R2. And the M17 R5. So there we go. Neither are particularly brilliant. The X17 R2 sounds slightly better, and the M17 R5 sounds slightly louder. Now, with regards to the screens on both these laptops, with the M17 R5, at the moment there's two realistic options of 1080p 165Hz or 1080p 360Hz panels available. But they're starting to release the 4K models, but only with the AMD 6700S. And that's quite a low-end graphics card. And that's a bit of a shame, really. I hope that's just early days teething problems with the configurations, because realistically, you need to be having the 4K with either the 3070 Ti or the 3080 Ti to really make the most of that 4K screen. Now, the X17 R2, you get the same 1080p 165 or 360 panels, but with every configuration, you can also choose the 4K option. And that is what I've got in this machine here, and it's an incredible screen. But whichever model you buy, the M17 R5 or the X17 R2, the panels they supply are the same between the two of them, so you're going to get the same quality panels on the panel you choose. Now, as we come above the screens, we've got the webcams, and they look and sound like this. This is a test of the webcam and the microphones on the Alienware X17 R2. And this is what the webcam and the microphones look and sound like on the Alienware M17 R5. And with the X17 R2, every single model gets Windows Hello facial recognition. I absolutely love that. Now, because I've got the base 165Hz 1080p panel here, there's no Windows Hello in this machine, so you do have to type your password in to log on, because obviously there's just no way of either fingerprint or facial recognition with this machine. So if you want an M17 R5 with that Windows Hello, you need to upgrade it to the 360Hz panel. Now, with regards to upgradability with both of these machines, they're both pretty good. Now, they're both DDR5 RAM laptops, and they both have two sockets available, so you can upgrade that yourself later on. They both come with the standard 4,800 megahertz at the moment. And I think that's more about availability of DDR5 in the marketplace at the moment. So my suggestion is get 16 gigabytes and upgrade that yourself later as faster RAM becomes available. They both got two Gen 4 M.2 SSD slots. Now, both these laptops are supplied with Gen 4 drives as well, which is nice. And they are decent, either Micron or Samsung drives, so they're very quick. Now, on the M17 R5, the Wi-Fi card is socketed, so you could change that if you wish. whereas the X17 R2 is soldered on, so you will not be changing the Wi-Fi card. But in all honesty, I don't think I've ever bothered changing a Wi-Fi card on a laptop that I've bought. And one last point, both of these laptops are inverted, so if you want to replace either of these machines, it does mean taking the entire motherboard out to do that, which is a real shame with these laptops. Now the last thing I want to look at internally are the cooling systems. Now the M17 R5 has a traditional 2-fan cooling system, and because this laptop is slightly thicker than the X17, the fans are also slightly thicker. Now the X17 R2 on the other hand has a 4-fan cooling setup and takes up a lot of the area inside of this laptop. Now this pumps the hot air out the back and most of the way down the sides on this machine, which is why there's no ports on either side of this X17 R2. Now because these Intel 12th generations run so hot, it needs a robust cooling system to be able to take that heat away from these CPUs. So this leads us neatly into our performance section. First thing we want to look at is Cinebench R23. Now, the M17 R5 with the upgraded 6900HX does score a really respectable 14,400 points. Now that beats last year's Intel 11th generation CPUs, and it also does so very efficiently, meaning that it doesn't need to pump out as much wattage to get this score. Now the X17 R2 on the other hand scores an absolutely phenomenal 18,000 points on our Intel 12th generation 12700H CPU. But in order to get that score, it uses 115 watts throughout the entire 10-minute test. Now, the fact that it can run at 150 watts on the CPU for over 10 minutes without throttling is a testament to how good this cooling system is. Then moving on to Geekbench 5. Again, the M17 R5 puts in very respectable scores at 1500 on the single core and just under 10,000 on the multi-core score. That again is in line with last year's 11th gen gaming processors. But the 12th generation in this X17 R2 yet again blows its competition away with a single core score of 1,700 and a multi-core score of 12,500. That is truly impressive. That's a massive increase in performance over the 11th gen and its competitor, the Ryzen 9 6900HX. Now moving on to the gaming side of things, both of these laptops have the same 16 gigabytes of DDR5 and they've both got a 150 watt 3070 Ti GPU. But although they're both equal, the X17 R2 does still score slightly higher. A lot of that is due to the fact that it's got a more powerful CPU and alleviating the bottlenecking that you will get from obviously a slightly lower powered CPU, but also the cooling system is just slightly more robust on the X17 R2. But when we put some gameplay footage side by side, although as I say the performance is slightly better on the X17 R2, the M17 R5 runs incredibly cool in comparison to the X17 R2, with its CPU usually either in the 60s if you're in the high performance mode or full fan mode, or 70s if you're in the balance mode, and the GPUs again about the 70s, which is really impressive as the last few laptops we've used are all 12th gen, and all these Intel 12th gen CPUs seem to run up to about 100 degrees centigrade. And this X17 R2, when you're gaming, you're very often in the 90s to 100C on that CPU. And as it's pushing so much wattage out of that CPU, it's also bringing up the temperatures on the GPU. So the GPU itself is usually in the late 70s or 80 degrees. But the good news is the gameplay experience on both these machines is absolutely flawless. I've spent the last 3 weeks now on the M17 R5 gaming solidly. It's been absolutely incredible. There's never any throttling. As you can see, the temperatures are really impressive. The keyboard never gets hot, and it's just a really lovely gaming experience. Now, the X17 R2 does run a little bit hotter on the top side of the palm rest than the M17 R5, particularly just underneath the screen where it's exhausting all that wattage from that CPU and GPU. That does get really scorchy on the X17 R2. But both of the keyboards on both these machines remain cool, especially the WASD keys, so they're both very comfortable to game on. With regards to the fan noise, both these machines are very similar. On balanced mode, the X17 R2 is actually quieter than the M17 R5, but when you put them either into performance or full fan modes, they both hit 52 decibels and sound pretty much identical. So neither of these has an issue with fan noise, and neither of these pulsate. They're just a constant hum, so they're very pleasant. Okay, so then battery life. Now, the Ryzen is an easy win here with battery life, and it was the same last generation, it's the same this generation. Even though these new 12th generation Intel CPUs have these alleged E-cores, which are supposed to be efficiency, the battery life is still very poor on all of the 12th generation laptops I've tested. As an example, with this one, with a little bit of tweaking, I can get almost 11 hours of light Wi-Fi streaming on the M17 R5, and in the same conditions on the X17 R2, you're looking at about 5 hours with the base panel, even less with this 4K machine. But despite the battery life being a lot less on the X17 R2, the performance on battery is an awful lot better with Intel than it is on Ryzen. they really throttle the Ryzen back hard to achieve that battery life. So if you're not so bothered about the actual life of the battery, but prefer the decent performance on battery, then the Intel's an easy win there. But if you need to be away for the power outlet for a decent amount of time, then you definitely need to choose a Ryzen laptop. And before we move on to the conclusion, just one more point of note. The X17 R2 also has power delivery through its Thunderbolt port. So you could also use up to 100-watt USB-C charger, and it won't give you full power to the laptop. But if you're doing office work or working away and you don't have your actual larger power adapter, you can just plug in a USB-C to charge the machine or to do light office work or light work with this X17 R2. Unfortunately, there's no option with the M17 R5. There's no power delivery through the USB-C. Right, so that takes me through to the conclusion. Now, I've enjoyed both of these machines, but my biggest gripe that I've had with the M17 R5 since my time having it is definitely the actual price of the machine. Now, I don't know whether Dell have just gone for early adopters tax when they've released this, because we ordered this on launch. But when I bought both these machines, for the same price, I've got the X17 R2 with a 4K panel as I've got with a 1080p M17 R5 with the Ryzen 9 processor. Realistically, this should have been a good 20% cheaper than the X17 R2 with the same specs, in my personal opinion. That's not to say that there aren't any benefits to buying the M17 R5, there certainly are. The temperatures, especially gaming temperatures, are fantastic on the M17 R5, and that's due to the efficiency of the Ryzen. And also, the battery life is incredible. I mean, 11 hours on a gaming laptop is almost unheard of, so that's really, really impressive. But everything else is better on the X17 R2. And if the price is almost equal, I think you'd almost be pretty much crazy to buy the M17 R5 over the X17 R2. But as the prices hopefully normalise over time, if there is a good chunk of change between these two, and I reckon at least 20%, then it makes a much harder choice. Now, me personally, I would probably still go for the X17 R2. I prefer the build quality, I prefer the slightly slimmer chassis, and I also like the fact that the performance of these Intel CPUs are absolutely incredible. Well, that's my thoughts on these two laptops. As always, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please pop your comments down below. Let me know, would you choose the M17 R5 or would you choose the X17 R2? And what do you think about Dell's current pricing strategy? Because to me, it seems absolutely insane. And as always, thank you for watching.